October 12th, 1927. The air inside the Manhattan garment workshop is thick with the scent of hot irons, machine oil, and fear. Steam hisses from presses, and the rhythmic clatter of 100 sewing machines is the only sound that dares to challenge the heavy silence hanging over the workers. You can feel the tension in the room, a palpable thing that clings to the bolts of fabric and settles like dust on the cutting tables. 2 men stand near the foreman's office, their presence sucking the very air from the space. They are not large men, not in the way of dockside brawlers, but they carry an aura of absolute, unassailable authority. One is Jacob Gura Shapiro. His face is a roadmap of street fights, a block of granite with small, suspicious eyes that miss nothing. His knuckles are permanently swollen, the tools of his trade. Beside him stands Louis Buchalter, known to everyone on these streets as Lepke. He is impeccably dressed in a dark, tailored suit, a stark contrast to the sweat and grime of the workshop. His features are sharp, intelligent, almost scholarly. He looks more like a banker than a gangster, and that is precisely his genius. While Gura is the storm, Lepke is the cold, calculating pressure system that directs it. A door opens and the factory owner, a man named Morris Diamond, is gently but firmly escorted out by one of Lepke's men. Diamond's face is pale, his eyes wide with a terror that goes beyond a simple shakedown. Lepke does not even look at him. His gaze is fixed on a ledger book on the foreman's desk. He runs a manicured finger down a column of figures, his lips barely moving. "The trucking," he says, his voice soft, almost a whisper, yet it cuts through the factory noise like a razor. "The union dues are short. Again." Gura Shapiro cracks his knuckles, a sound like pistol shots in the cavernous room. "Maybe they didn't get the message, Lepke," he growls. "They received the message," Lepke replies, not looking up from the numbers. "They just have not processed the expense." For Lepke, it is all just business. Beatings, threats, shattered kneecaps. They are entries on a balance sheet. He is pioneering a new form of organized crime, one built not on neighborhood turf but on entire industries. He and Gura started on the Lower East Side, 2 ambitious sons of Jewish immigrants who saw the path out of the ghetto was paved with violence and intimidation. They began with pushcart peddlers, then moved to the unions, discovering that controlling the workers and the transportation was the key to controlling everything. The garment district was their crown jewel. They controlled the cutters, the truckers, the pressers. A factory owner who resisted found his shipments destroyed, his workers on strike, or his face rearranged by Gura's fists. A more stubborn owner might receive a visit from the sluggers. These were men paid a few dollars to administer a savage beating, a practice called schlamming. For the truly defiant, there was another method. A vial of acid thrown in the face would ensure no one else ever considered saying no. This was the world Lepke built, a world of systematic terror masquerading as business. He was the chairman of the board. Gura was his head of enforcement. They called their operation the Combination, and it was making them millions. They ran the fur dressing industry, the flour trucking business, and the bakeries of New York City. Every loaf of bread sold, every coat that left a factory, paid a small tribute to Louis Buchalter. Lepke finally closes the ledger. He turns to one of his men, a hulking figure named Mendy Weiss. "The trucks from the diamond factory will not be making their deliveries tomorrow," he states calmly, "and Mr. Diamond will need to find a new foreman." This one seems to have trouble with his arithmetic. There is no emotion in his voice. It is an order, an entry in the day's business. He adjusts his tie and walks toward the exit, Gura following a step behind like a loyal shadow. The factory owner, Morris Diamond, slumps against the wall, defeated. He knows what this means. His business is now just another asset on Lepke Buchalter's portfolio, another number on a ledger kept by the killer with a calculator. 1933, a suite high in the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, where the grit of the city streets is a distant abstraction below. The air is a heavy cocktail of expensive cigar smoke and poured whiskey. Here, the architects of a new American empire are gathered. They are not industrialists or politicians, but they wield more power than most. Charles Lucky, Luciano, his face scarred but his eyes sharp with vision, presides over the meeting. Meyer Lansky, the quiet financial genius, sits beside him, running numbers in his head that would baffle a Wall Street analyst. Benjamin Bugsy Siegel is here, handsome and volatile. So is Frank Costello, the Prime Minister, with his political connections and gravelly voice. And at the table, perfectly composed, is Lepke Buchalter. He listens more than he speaks, his gaze moving from man to man, assessing, calculating. The end of Prohibition has forced a change. The wild, chaotic days of bootlegging are over. The bloody Castel-la-Marie's War, which had left hundreds of bodies on the streets of New York, taught them all a valuable lesson. Open warfare is bad for business. It attracts police, federal agents, and the kind of headlines that disrupt the steady flow of cash. Luciano is proposing a new way, a more civilized structure for crime. He calls it the Commission, a board of directors for the National Syndicate, representing the 5 families of New York and bosses from Chicago to Cleveland. "We need rules," Luciano says, his voice commanding the room. "A way to settle things without starting a war every time someone gets greedy. We vote. We make decisions as a body. And when a decision is made, it's final. But every government needs an army. Every corporation needs an enforcement division. What happens when a member of the syndicate breaks the rules? When an outsider, a witness, or a prosecutor becomes a threat to the entire organization? This is the heart of the discussion. The reason Lepke is in this room. The Italians cannot be trusted to police themselves without starting vendettas that spiral out of control. They need an independent contractor. Lansky speaks, his voice calm and logical. It has to be separate, insulated. An order goes in, a problem is solved. The board of directors never sees the hands that do the work. His eyes meet Lepke's across the table. It needs to be run like a business, efficiently, quietly, with no loose ends. Loose. This is Lepke's language. He has already perfected the model in the garment district. He understands systems, plausible deniability, and the cold arithmetic of violence. He and his partner from the old days, Albert Anastasia, a man so violent he was nicknamed the Mad Hatter, had access to a stable of killers from the Brownsville and East New York neighborhoods of Brooklyn. These were not hot-headed mafiosi seeking honor. They were working-class assassins, men who would kill for a paycheck. They were known as the Brooklyn Boys. Lepke finally speaks, his words measured. There would be a process. A contract is put out. It must be approved by the board. No personal disputes. Only business that affects the entire organization. He leans forward slightly. A price is set. Let us say $5,000 per piece of work. Payment is made. My people handle the assignment. The men who do the work will not know who ordered it. The man who ordered it will never meet the men who do the work. It is clean. A murmur of approval goes around the room. This is genius. It is a corporate solution to a gangland problem. The commission would sanction a hit. The order would be passed to Lepke. Lepke, the CEO, would then contact Anastasia, his chief operating officer. Anastasia would choose a team from his stable of killers. They would be given a target, a location, and a weapon of choice. An ice pick, a Garrett, a .32 caliber pistol. They would carry out the hit and disappear. The body would be found, or it would not. The problem would be solved. Lepke Buchalter would mark the expense in his mental ledger. And so it was born. In that smoke-filled hotel suite, Louis Lepke Buchalter was appointed the head of the syndicate's new enforcement arm. The press would later give it a more sensational name, Murder Incorporated. For Lepke, it was simply the national expansion of his business model. He was no longer just a labor racketeer. He was the chairman of the board of the country's largest, most efficient, and most profitable assassination service. From this day forward, any mobster, witness, or civilian who threatened the syndicate's profits would become just another number on Lepke's balance sheet, an account to be settled by his anonymous killers. A rainy Tuesday night in Brownsville, Brooklyn, November 11th, 1935. The neon sign of the Midnight Rose, a candy and cigar store on the corner of Saratoga and Livonia Avenues, casts a sickly pink glow onto the wet pavement. Inside, the air is stale, thick with the smells of cheap chocolate, chewing tobacco, and damp wool. This is no ordinary candy store. It is the unofficial headquarters, the central dispatch for the killers of Murder, Inc. The public phone on the wall is their lifeline to the syndicate, to the dead. Behind the counter, a heavyset man named Louis Capone, no relation to the Chicago boss, wipes down the marble soda fountain. He is the proprietor, the caretaker of this strange nexus of crime. Tonight, the store is more crowded than usual. A half-dozen men are scattered around the small space, pretending to read newspapers or idly sip soda. These are the killers, the rank-and-file employees of Lepke's enterprise. There is Harry, Pittsburgh Phil, Strauss, a dapper but utterly ruthless killer who boasted of at least 100 murders. Emmanuel Mendy Weiss, one of Lepke's most trusted lieutenants, stands by the door, his eyes constantly scanning the street. And in a back booth, nursing a coffee, sits Abe Kid Twist Relis. Reels is small, wiry, with a sharp bird-like face and nervous energy that seems to crackle around him. He is one of the most prolific and feared killers on the payroll, a man who preferred an ice pick to a gun because it was quieter and left less of a mess. He and his partners, Martin Bugsy Goldstein and Harry Happy Mayone, formed the core of the Brooklyn crew. They were on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, waiting for the phone to ring. Just after 10 o'clock, it does. The sharp, jarring sound cuts through the low murmur of conversation. Every head in the store turns. Louis Capone answers, listens for a moment, then grunts. He hangs up and looks toward the back booth. For you, Abe. Reels unfolds himself from the booth and walks to the phone. He listens, his expression unreadable. The voice on the other end is Albert Anastasia's, the Lord High Executioner. The connection is sterile, brief. Anastasia gives a name, Joseph Rosen. He gives an address, a small candy store in Brownsville, not unlike this one. Rosen, a former garment trucker, had been forced out of business by Lepke's rackets years ago. Now he was making noise. He had been subpoenaed by a special prosecutor who was starting to dig into Lepke's control of the trucking industry. The prosecutor's name was Thomas E. Dewey. Rosen had to be silenced. It is a must-do, Anastasia's voice rasps over the line. Lepke's orders. It has to look like a robbery. Make it fast. The line goes dead. Relis hangs up the phone. The job is sanctioned. The machinery of Murder, Inc. begins to turn. He walks back to the booth, where Goldstein and Mayone are waiting. He does not need to say much. A candy store owner, name's Rosen, up the street. Pittsburgh Phil Strauss looks up from his newspaper, a hint of professional jealousy in his eyes. You need an extra hand? Relis shakes his head. 3 is enough. It is a simple piece of work. He turns to Mayone. Get the car. We need a clean one. Mayone nods and slips out the front door, disappearing into the rain. Goldstein checks the .38 revolver tucked into his waistband. Relis prefers his ice pick, the long, thin steel shank currently strapped to his forearm beneath his coat sleeve. It is his signature. They do not discuss the morality of what they are about to do. They do not talk about Joseph Rosen's family or his life. They discuss logistics, the layout of the street, the best time to go in, the escape route. For them, this is a job, like plumbing or carpentry. A problem is identified, a contract is issued, and they are the technicians sent to fix it. The pay is good, the work is steady, and in their world, it is a respected profession. They are the troubleshooters for the board of directors. A few minutes later, Mayone pulls up to the curb in a stolen black Ford sedan, its engine humming quietly. Relis, Goldstein, and another killer named James Ferrico get in. They do not say a word as they pull away from the curb, leaving the pink glow of the midnight rose behind them. They are now on the clock, heading to another candy store, to fulfill another contract, to balance another account on Lepke Buchalter's bloody ledger. September 13th, 1936. The black Ford sedan glides through the slick, rain-swept streets of Brownsville. Inside, the silence is absolute, broken only by the rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers and the hiss of tires on wet asphalt. Harry Mayone drives with an unhurried, almost casual focus, his eyes scanning the road, the alleys, the darkened storefronts. In the back, Abe Relis sits perfectly still, a coiled spring of lethal energy. His ice pick is loose in its forearm sheath, ready. Beside him, James Ferrico and Bugsy Goldstein are impassive figures of shadow. There is no conversation, no last-minute bravado. This is a commute. They are on their way to the office. Mayone turns onto Sutter Avenue and kills the headlights, letting the car coast to a stop in the deep shadow of a closed warehouse 2 blocks from their destination. "Give it a look, Abe," he says, his voice a low rumble. Relais slips out of the car, melting into the drizzling darkness. He moves with a fluid, predatory grace, sticking to the doorways and awnings. He walks past the target, a small, unassuming candy store, its windows fogged against the night chill. A weak yellow light spills from inside. Through a clear patch on the glass, Relis can see his man. Joseph Rosen, a graying man in his late 50s with weary shoulders, is wiping down his counter, preparing to close. He is alone. The street is empty. Perfect. Relays returns to the car, his face emotionless. He is in there, sweeping up. He looks at Goldstein and Ferrico. "We go in, quick. It is a robbery. Grab the cash. I will take care of the candy man." Goldstein nods, pulling the .38 revolver from his belt. Ferrico cracks his knuckles, the only outward sign of anticipation. Mayone keeps the engine running, a low, steady thrum. "Do not take all night," he says to the rearview mirror. The 3 killers get out and walk toward the store, not together in a menacing pack, but spaced out like any other pedestrians braving the miserable weather. They reach the door. A small bell tinkles as they enter, a cheerful domestic sound that is horribly out of place. Joseph Rosen looks up from his work, a flicker of annoyance on his face at the late customers. The annoyance dissolves into confusion, and then into stark, paralyzing terror as he sees the look in their eyes and the gun in Goldstein's hand. "The register!" Goldstein barks, his voice flat and hard. Rosen's hands tremble as he fumbles with the cash drawer. He pulls out a pathetic handful of crumpled bills, maybe $30. "Take it," he pleads, his voice a choked whisper. "Take it all. Just do not hurt me." Reels walks around the counter, his movements calm, almost gentle. He stands beside Rosen, who is now shaking uncontrollably, his eyes fixed on the gun. "We know you have been talking, Joe," Reels says softly, his voice barely audible over the rain outside. "Talking to Dewey's people." Rosen's face goes white. He opens his mouth to deny it, to say something, anything. But no words come out. He knows now this is not a robbery. This is an execution. In that instant, Bugsy Goldstein opens fire. The small store explodes with noise and violence. The first shot shatters a jar of hard candy on the shelf behind Rosen. The subsequent shots slam into his chest. As he collapses, Relis steps in, his arm moving in a swift, vicious arc. He drives the ice pick deep into Rosen's head and neck, again and again, a flurry of silent, brutal punctuation to the roar of the gun. It is overkill, a bloody emphasis designed to send a message to anyone else who might consider cooperating with the district attorney. Ferrico scoops the money from the counter. Goldstein fires a few more rounds into the walls for effect. Then, as quickly as they entered, they are gone. The bell on the door gives another little tinkle as they slip back into the rain-drenched night. They get into the waiting Ford. Mayone pulls away from the curb smoothly, turning at the next corner and the one after that, weaving a path back into the labyrinth of Brooklyn. Inside the candy store, Joseph Rosen lies behind his counter in a spreading pool of blood, his body riddled with 17 bullets. The account has been settled. The potential witness has been erased. Miles away, Lepke Buchalter sleeps soundly, his empire secure, the transaction complete. September 14th, 1936. The morning sun cuts sharp angles across the Gothic spires of the Woolworth Building in Lower Manhattan. Inside, on the 14th floor, the office of Special Prosecutor Thomas E. Dewey is a command center in a war most New Yorkers do not even know is being fought. The air is thick with coffee and ambition. Maps of the city are pinned to the walls, crisscrossed with colored string that connects names, businesses, and crime scenes into a vast, intricate web. Stacks of files and wiretap transcripts teeter on every desk. This is the front line of the battle against organized crime. Thomas Dewey, a man of precise habits and immense self-confidence, stands before a corkboard. Pinned to it are the grisly crime scene photographs of Joseph Rosen. Dewey, with his neat mustache and piercing dark eyes, studies the images not with horror, but with a cold, analytical fury. He is a bulldog, and he has scented his prey. He taps a photograph showing the bullet-riddled corpse. 17 holes, he says to his team of young, hand-picked prosecutors. His voice is crisp, devoid of emotion. They took $32 from the till. Does anyone in this room believe this was a robbery? A chorus of negative murmurs fills the room. One of his deputies, a sharp young lawyer named Murray Gurfein, speaks up. It was a message, Tom. Rosen was scheduled to testify before the grand jury next week. This was to scare off anyone else who might be thinking of talking. It is more than a message, Dewey counters, turning from the board. It is a signature. The sheer, gratuitous violence. The professionalism. This was not a stick-up gone wrong. This was a corporate decision. He paces the room, his mind connecting the threads. This is Louis Buchalter. He runs his rackets with the efficiency of a Ford assembly line, and he handles his personnel problems with the same cold logic. Joseph Rosen was a personnel problem? For months, Dewey's investigation had been a frustrating exercise in punching at shadows. He had successfully prosecuted smaller racketeers, but the big fish, men like Luciano and Lepke, remained untouchable. They were insulated by layers of underlings, their names never appearing on any documents, their orders transmitted through verbal chains of command that left no evidence. Witnesses would recant their testimony, disappear, or end up like Joseph Rosen. The wall of silence, the mafia's code of omerta, seemed unbreakable. Lepke was a ghost in the machine. The Rosen murder changes the calculus for Dewey. It is a direct, arrogant challenge to his authority. He becomes obsessed, driving his team relentlessly. They work around the clock, chasing down every lead, every rumor. But the trail goes cold. The stolen Ford is found wiped clean and abandoned. The ballistics are a dead end. The killers have vanished back into the Brooklyn underworld from which they came. For 2 years, the Rosen case remains an open wound in Dewey's investigation, a symbol of the syndicate's impenetrable power. Lepke, feeling the heat, goes into hiding, running his vast criminal empire from the shadows. But the crack in the wall, when it finally comes, does not come from Dewey's high-profile office in Manhattan. It comes from the grimy, politically charged courts of Brooklyn, where District Attorney William O'Dwyer is running his own separate war. O'Dwyer is not concerned with the national syndicate. He is trying to solve a string of local, seemingly unconnected gangland slayings. In 1940, his office arrests a small-time hoodlum and enforcer named Harry Big Greenie Greenberg on a murder charge. Facing the electric chair and abandoned by the syndicate, Big Greenie panics. He offers to trade information for his life. The information is passed to a determined assistant district attorney named Burton Turkis. In a tense, late-night interrogation, Greenberg starts talking. He talks about a crew of killers based in Brownsville. He names names: Goldstein, Mayone, Strauss. And he names their sharp-witted, ice-pick-wielding leader, Abe Kid Twist Rillis. Greenberg tells Turkis that these men do not just kill for themselves. They take contracts from on high. It is a business, he says, a service. He tells them about a place, a candy store on Saratoga Avenue, where the killers wait for the phone to ring. For the first time, a prosecutor hears the inside story of the syndicate's enforcement arm. Burton Turkis listens, his pen scratching furiously across his notepad, and realizes he has not just found a lead in a local murder case. He has found the key that could unlock the door to America's most secret and terrifying organization. March 1940. The Half Moon Hotel in Coney Island stands like a lonely sentinel against the gray Atlantic. On the 6th floor, in a room with a reinforced door and steel shutters bolted over the windows, Abe Kid Twist Relis paces like a caged animal. The salt-laced air does nothing to calm his nerves. He is the star witness, the canary who is singing his heart out, and he is a dead man walking. Outside his door, 6 police detectives stand guard around the clock, their holsters unsnapped. This is room 623, the most heavily guarded hotel room in America. Following Harry Greenberg's tip, Burton Turkis and the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office had moved fast. They rounded up Reyes, Goldstein, and Mayoni. Facing a mountain of evidence on a series of local hits, Reyes saw the electric chair looming. He was a professional, a businessman, and he made a business decision. He would trade his life for testimony. He would break the underworld's most sacred code and become an informer. And what a story he told. For weeks, in marathon sessions, Reyes laid bare the entire operation for Turkis and his team. He spoke in the casual, technical language of a tradesman describing his work. He called killing hitting, or doing a piece of work. He detailed dozens of murders, providing names, dates, and locations. He explained the system of contracts, the role of Albert Anastasia, and the ultimate authority of the syndicate's board. He described the Midnight Rose candy store, the stolen cars, the ice picks, the garrotes. He was a walking encyclopedia of homicide. His testimony was a bombshell. He implicated his own partners, Bugsy Goldstein and Happy Mayone. He tied Pittsburgh Phil Strauss to so many murders that the court stenographer's fingers cramped. And, most importantly, he connected the Brooklyn killers to the man at the top of the pyramid. He told the investigators about the contract on Joseph Rosen, the candy store owner who was about to talk to Thomas Dewey. He named the man who personally ordered the hit, the man they all feared and respected, the chairman of the board, Louis Lepke Buchalter. With Reyes's testimony, the wall of silence shattered. Lepke, who had finally surrendered to the federal government on a narcotics charge in a bizarre publicity stunt brokered by radio host Walter Winchell, now faced a far more serious problem. He had hoped for a manageable federal sentence, but now Thomas Dewey, his old nemesis, had him extradited to New York to stand trial for the murder of Joseph Rosen. The trial was a sensation. Dewey, a master of courtroom drama, put Abe Relis on the stand. For days, the diminutive killer, surrounded by guards, calmly and precisely detailed how Lepke's organization had ordered and carried out the execution. He was a damningly credible witness. The jury was convinced. Louis Buchalter, the untouchable mastermind, was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. But the war was not over. The syndicate was reeling. Reyes was not done singing. His next target was Albert Anastasia, the Lord High Executioner himself. The trial was set for November 12, 1941. The night before he was scheduled to testify, Reyes was in room 623 of the Half Moon Hotel, confident and relaxed. He joked with his police guards, ate a big dinner, and went to bed. At 6:55 the next morning, a pedestrian walking along the Coney Island boardwalk looked up and saw something horrifying. Lying twisted on the low rooftop of the hotel's kitchen extension, 6 stories below his guarded room, was the body of Abe Kid Twist Reyes. The official police report was baffling. It claimed that Reyes, a man who could not even change a light bulb without help, had tried to escape by tying 2 bedsheets together and lowering himself out the window. The sheet, they said, had come untied, and he had fallen to his death. The press dubbed him the canary who could sing but couldn't fly. But no one in the underworld or in law enforcement believed it for a second. The window was open only a few inches. The bed sheets were tied with a complex knot. The guards claimed they had heard nothing. It was clear the syndicate had reached him, even inside a police fortress. Without its star witness, the case against Albert Anastasia collapsed. The rest of Murder Inc.'s killers went to the electric chair, but the Lord High Executioner walked free. For Lepke, however, languishing on death row, the canary's final, fatal flight changed nothing. His own fate had already been sealed. March 4th, 1944. A cold, sterile quiet hangs over Sing Sing Prison's death house. The air smells of disinfectant and despair. In a small holding cell, Louis Lepke Buchalter sits on a narrow cot. The impeccably tailored suits are gone, replaced by a drab prison uniform. The look of cold, calculating authority has been worn away by years of appeals and the gnawing certainty of his fate, leaving behind the pale, drawn face of a man staring into the abyss. He is 51 years old, but tonight he looks ancient. For nearly 3 years, his high-priced lawyers had fought a brilliant, desperate battle. They filed motion after motion, appeal after appeal, taking his case all the way to the United States Supreme Court. They argued that his conviction was based solely on the testimony of a corrupt and unreliable witness, Abe Relis, they argued that his federal narcotics sentence should take precedence over the state's death sentence. For a time, it seemed they might succeed. A legal loophole, a sympathetic judge, a governor's commutation. Lepke clung to every sliver of hope. But his old nemesis, Thomas Dewey, was now the governor of New York, and he was not a man inclined to mercy, especially not for the mobster who had so brazenly challenged him. Every appeal was denied. Every legal door was slammed shut. The machinery of the state was as implacable as his own organization had once been. Tonight, the final account was coming due. Earlier in the evening, two of his most trusted lieutenants, Louis Capone and Mendy Weiss, who had been convicted with him, had taken their own final walks. From his cell, Lepke would have heard the low hum of the generators powering up, the solemn footsteps of the guards, the heavy thud of the death chamber door. Now it is his turn. The warden and a prison chaplain appear at his cell door. They speak to him in low, somber tones. Lepke listens, nods, and rises to his feet. There is no outburst, no final, desperate plea. He walks with a quiet, almost dignified resignation. He is a businessman, and this is the final, non-negotiable term of his contract. He had lived by the ledger, and he would die by it. As he is strapped into the heavy oak electric chair, the infamous old Sparky, he is asked if he has any last words,